Aloha, guys. This is Dr. Tom Walker coming at you again from somewhere in the Hawaiian Islands. Um, we were speaking about the astounding number of founders of great scientists, like founders of quantum mechanics and all, that frankly stated that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. Several of these individuals, and we're going to talk about more now, thought that consciousness was the most fundamental aspect of the cosmos. Okay, we left off with Dr. John von Neumann. He was, among all these brilliant scientists and mathematicians, they bowed down to von Neumann and thought he was the supreme mathematician. He also was incredible with computer development. John von Neumann was a physicist, mathematician, and computer science. He was considered the finest mathematician of his day and is recognized as particularly brilliant among other quantum physicists. Von Neumann established the mathematical basis for quantum mechanics that we use today. He stated that we must divide the world into two parts, the observed system and the observer. For wave packets to condense into particles, in other words, from the zero-point energy or quantum vacuum fields and so forth, wave packet to condense into particles, they must be measured or observed. A measurement chain was described by the great physicist John Bell, who we haven't talked about yet, and it became known as von Neumann's chain. When the chain was broken, matter manifested. Again, now what we're talking about is the particles that make up matter in our world, when they're not manifest, are in this great vast sea of unknown energy. And human consciousness or measurement or disturbing it or concentrating the energy causes these virtual particles to become real, at least for some period of time. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Von Neumann said the measurement chain ends only when knowledge of the measurement is registered by an extra physical factor. In other words, the mind or consciousness. Let's go back over this again. So we have two parts, according to von Neumann, the observed system and the observer, us. For wave packets to condense into particles, they must be measured or observed. A measurement chain was described by physicist John Bell, great Irish physicist, would be one of the few to prove Einstein was incorrect about some things. And it became known as von Neumann's chain. When the chain was broken, matter manifested. Okay? And here's what von Neumann said about that chain. The measurement chain ends only when knowledge of the measurement is registered by an extra physical factor. In other words, matter becomes reality only from an extra physical factor. In other words, the interaction with mind or consciousness. What's so amazing, guys, is so many of these people, of these great, shared these types of beliefs. I can't emphasize enough how unusual that is by today's standards, because they'd be, but like we said earlier, there's over specialization and some would say overemphasis on mathematics. I hesitate to say that, although I really think that's the case, because I realize that we do need mathematics for a lot of things, and particularly these sorts of things require advanced mathematical treatments. Okay, nature is nature is the finest scientific journal in the world. It's the most preeminent, the most respected. International Weekly Journal of Science. In 2005, it published a paper by a scientist. See, Nature is the preeminent scientific journal in the world. The big leagues. In 2005, Richard Conn Henry wrote an essay in Nature entitled The Mental Universe. Here it tells the number. And here was his intro to it. The only reality in mind is mind and observations. The only reality is minds and observations. 2005 in Nature. But observations are not of things. To see the universe as it really is, we must abandon our tendency to conceptualize observation as things. Physicists shy from the truth because the truth is so alien to everyday physics. The universe is entirely mental. The universe is entirely mental. Guys, I've been studying this stuff intently for 25 years and for a number of years prior to that, and there's the pendulum is swinging in this direction, recognizing consciousness and all as being of great importance and not something just to be stepped over and left aside. The Royal Society. This was from an article published in 2015. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Giulio Tonoi and Christoph Koch wrote in the Royal Society publication, the theory holds that consciousness is a fundamental property possessed by physical systems having specific causal properties. The theory holds that consciousness is a fundamental property possessed by physical systems having specific causal properties. Heavy stuff, guys. And again, this isn't some, journal of metaphysics like we talked about with Hal Puthoff. These are major, big leagues, as high as it goes. The science of consciousness has made great strides by focusing on the behavioral and neuronal correlates of experience. However, while such correlates are important for progress to occur, they are not enough if we are able to understand even basic facts. For example, why the cerebral cortex gives rise to consciousness, but the cerebellum does not. Though it has even more neurons and appears to be just as complicated. Now, if you don't know a little bit about neuroanatomy, you don't know what that is. Cerebral cortex, where he talked about the thin layer of tissue, of neural tissue, where the highest thought processes take place. But we also have one of the portions of the brain's the cerebellum, not to be confused with cerebrum, which deals with balance and how can I put this? Balance and proprioception. You know what proprioception is? It's knowing your arms are out like this without having to look and see that they are. Cerebellum is very important. Here's what they said. Hey dudes, why does the cerebral cortex have consciousness or give rise to it? Per current theory, CCNs, and the cerebellum doesn't, even though it has as many nerve cells and appears to be just as complicated. Okay. MIT physicist Max Tegmark. Consciousness is a state of matter, in his opinion. Generations of physicists and chemists have studied what happens when you group together vast numbers of atoms, finding that their collective behavior depends on the pattern in which they are arranged. For example, the key difference between a solid, a liquid, and a gas lies not in the types of atoms, but in their arrangement. And primarily in their temperature, but that affects the arrangement. I conjecture that consciousness can be understood as yet another state of matter, just as there are many types of liquids. There are many types of consciousness. I can live with that. A new way of thinking about consciousness is sweeping through science like wildfire. Now physicists are using it to formulate the problem of consciousness in concrete mathematical terms for the first time. You can only argue something like this, guys, or ignore it for so long. Okay, one of my favorite topics, and we'll talk about this in great detail later on, is the fabulous PAIR program at Princeton University. PAIR stands for Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. It was an amazing program on the study of psychokinesis and other paranormal activity for some 28 years. Robert John, gentleman here, and Brenda Dunn. Brenda was the lab manager, so to speak. She's is a psychologist. All right, let me just read what I say, and it'll go more smoothly. We will discuss Princeton's fabulous PAIR program in detail very soon. However, it's relevant to what we're discussing now, so here's a brief intro. Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab began in 1979 and operated for some 28 years, completing their mission in early 2007. Robert John, PhD, and Dean. Now, John was the Dean of the Princeton School of Engineering. So he wasn't some dude that was a guest lecturer who studied parapsychology on the side. He was the Dean of the School of Engineering and was one of the most respected scientists in the world. And he operated this pair program on the side. Dean of Princeton's Engineering School and psychologist Brenda Dunn conducted millions of trials involving large numbers of subjects on a quest to see if human consciousness could influence physical systems, specifically random number generators. Here's a picture of an example of what they utilized. At first, we're going to talk about studying micro PK. Actually, this would not be it, but it's such a cute picture, I couldn't help myself. Based on quantum principles, random number generators, RNGs, can produce truly random numbers, patterns of ones and zeros, but ones that are completely random by using quantum applied applications of quantum mechanics. John and Dunn set out to see if the subjects could influence the random appearance of these binary numbers with their mind. In fact, what they were testing was micro PK. Now, PK stands for psychokinesis. There are currently 4 types of extrasensory perception, although they actually have changed the name. There's telepathy, mind-to-mind transfer, clairvoyance, gaining information from the environment, precognition, being able to predict or have some knowledge of future events, and psychokinesis, a motor phenomenon where, like when Luke Skywalker made the lightsaber come to him, that's psychokinesis. That's very much macro PK. In fact, what they were testing was micro PK, micro psychokinesis. Later, they experimented with macro PK, influencing the roll of marbles into a collection of bins. They weren't actually marbles, we'll talk about it. They were light, I think, like styrofoam balls. They quickly realized that the subjects could influence the randomness of this, and they could do it over and over again. They also worked extensively in remote viewing. We will discuss the details of the pair work later, but for now, let's say it was an astounding success, although John commented on how disappointing it was to acquire decades of profound data and not be able to get his Princeton colleagues to walk across the lawn and examine it. John was dean of the School of Engineering and a renowned scientist who was considered the world's leading authority on electronic space propulsion at the time. So status doesn't seem to matter when certain subjects are involved. And I'm going to tell you guys, nothing is more taboo than psychic phenomena. That's a bold statement to make, but I mean, even incest and all these other things, psychic phenomena is more taboo than that, in my opinion. Here's good old Princeton. I lived in Princeton for a few years, not the university. The original benchmark RNG work involved 2.5 million trials. That's a lot, guys. Over 12 years with 91 operators or test subjects. 2.5 million trials, that's an enormous amount. The result was a z-score of 6 sigma, which is quite significant. All will be explained soon. This tells us that how apt it is to have been just a coincidence, the z-score. It has to do with the mean and standard deviations. A z-score of 567 sigma is astounding, huge. Much more work was conducted with similar impressive results. A few years later, our pal Dean Radin and Roger D. Nelson were both at Princeton, and they decided to do a meta-analysis of the effects of consciousness on random number systems. Dean Radin again, Roger Nelson. We're going to run out of time before I can finish this. Meta-analysis was invented in 1976 by statistician Gene Glass of the University of Colorado. What meta-analysis is, guys, it's an analysis of the analyses, a study of the studies that study the same basic phenomenon. Now, we're going to run out of time, and this is one of my favorite areas, so I'm going to wait and put it on another video. So it's starting to get fun, guys. We're starting to get past this this preliminary stuff and get into the meat of it. So see you next time. Dr. Tom signing off.